7:49 a.m. A gravel driveway in rural Ohio. A woman named Bobby Jo, Dana Rhoden's sister, pulls up to feed some dogs. It's a chore she's done 100 times. Nothing looks wrong, except the dogs are loose in the yard when they should be inside. Except the truck that should be gone for work is still parked in the drive. She lets herself in. She has a key. She's family. 90 seconds later she's on the phone, screaming that there's blood everywhere, that someone has beaten her brother-in-law to death. She's wrong about one thing. Nobody was beaten. He was shot, twice, at close range, in his sleep, one of 8 members of his family killed across 4 homes in a single night. She has no idea yet that 3 more houses are about to reveal the same thing. She has no idea that 6 years from now, a man will sit on a witness stand and calmly describe, in his own words, exactly how each one of them died, because he was the one who pulled the trigger. And here's the part that will take investigators 2.5 years, over 1,000 tips, and the largest homicide investigation in Ohio history to prove, the people who did this weren't strangers. They weren't cartel hitmen. They weren't passing through. They were already in the family photos. 8 people dead. 4 crime scenes. 2.5 years where the entire country, investigators included, chased a killer who didn't exist, while the real one sat 2 counties over, running a business, showing up to family funerals. If stories like this, where the danger was never a stranger, it was already sitting at the table, are your kind of thing, hit subscribe now. We post a new case every week, and this one gets stranger with almost every scene. Let's go back to the morning of April 22, 2016. Before this was a headline, it was just a family, the kind that gets tangled together in small towns, where cousins live down the same gravel road and nobody ever really moves away. Christopher Rhoden Sr., 40, was the center of it. Even after his marriage to Dana ended, the two of them kept the family close. She was 37, living just up the road with several of their kids. That closeness is part of why this got so much worse. The killers didn't have to hunt down one house. They had to hit 4, clustered together, in a matter of hours. Chris and Dana's children were Clarence Frankie Rhoden, 20, Hannah Mae Rhoden, 19, and Christopher Rhoden Jr., just 16. Frankie was engaged to Hannah Hazel Gilly, 20, new to the family, already living as part of it. Chris Sr.'s brother Kenneth, 44, and cousin Gary, 38, rounded out the household. And then there was the person whose name wouldn't come up publicly until years later, Hannah's daughter, Sophia. Not even 3 years old. Her father was a young man from another well-known local family. His name was Jake Wagner. Remember that name. Every single thing that happens tonight happens because of him, and by the end of this video, he'll be the one telling us how. Here's the timeline, almost exactly as it happened. Sometime after 11 p.m. on April 21st, someone started moving through the properties on Union Hill Road. The autopsies would later show contact-range gunshot wounds, the muzzle touching skin, and no defensive wounds on any of the victims. They didn't fight. Most of them never even woke up. At 7:49 the next morning, Bobby Jo's 911 call starts the clock. Within minutes, a sheriff's deputy is radioing for ambulances at multiple addresses at once, a call this county had probably never had to make before. By late morning, 4 more bodies are confirmed in the homes next door: Dana, Hannah, Frankie, Hannah Gilly. 7 victims, 3 houses, all within a short walk of each other. 1 person is still missing. At 1:26 that afternoon, almost 6 hours after the first call, a relative walks into a 4th property and finds the 8th and final victim, Kenneth Rhoden, shot dead. In 3 of those homes, investigators find something that will haunt this case for the next 10 years, a toddler, an infant, and a newborn just 4 days old. All 3 completely unharmed. Sleeping feet away from parents who never woke up. Whoever did this knew exactly who to leave alive. And that single detail, the precision of it, is about to send the entire investigation in the wrong direction for 2.5 years. Here's how. Within days, search teams find something that reshapes the whole case: marijuana grow operations on the Rhoden properties, one of them with over 100 plants under cultivation. To the public, this looks like the answer. No robbery, no ransacking, just precision executions across 4 homes, the signature of a drug hit. A cartel. A message. Officials stay deliberately vague, calling the drugs only an undercurrent, never a motive. But vague is enough to fill 2 years of headlines, while the actual killers watch from a safe distance, completely unbothered. It isn't entirely wrong, there is money moving strangely, there are drugs on the property. It's just aimed at the wrong people. And it buys the real killers time they'll use well. But one piece of missing hardware is about to tell investigators this was never a stranger's crime at all.
Outside the loft housing one of the grow operations, agents find a security camera, mounted, functional, clearly meant to warn whoever ran that operation of anyone approaching. The recorder it fed into is gone. Not broken, removed. Whoever walked through that property that night knew the camera was there, knew exactly what to take on the way out. That's not a stranger. That's not a rival dealer panicking mid-robbery. That's someone who had been inside that building before, who knew the layout, knew the equipment, knew what would put them at the scene if they left it behind. The question stops being who wanted the Rhodens dead. It becomes, who knew this property well enough to erase themselves from it. And when investigators finally answer that question, the evidence trail leads to a wooded pond, a well, and a family who thought they'd hidden everything well enough.
What follows becomes, by every measure, the biggest homicide investigation in Ohio's history. Over 1,000 tips. Hundreds of interviews. More than 200 search warrants and subpoenas. Testing on over 700 pieces of evidence. It's so far beyond what the local sheriff's office can handle that within hours, the case gets handed to the state's Bureau of Criminal Investigation. And for 2 years, it produces almost nothing the public can see. No arrests. No suspects named. Just silence, broken occasionally by a press conference confirming the case is still open. But quietly, one family has already become the entire focus of the investigation. And what agents pull out of a pond and a well on their property will end up deciding this entire case. George, Billy, Wagner III and his wife Angela aren't outsiders to Pike County. They run an ATV dealership and a scrap metal business. Their 2 adult sons, George IV and Edward, known as Jake, grew up around the same small community as the Rhodens. Jake first met Hannah Rhoden at the county fair in 2010. She was 13. He was 17. He asked her parents for permission to date her. For the first few years, one of her brothers stayed with them anytime they were together. By the time Hannah was 15, she was pregnant. Their daughter, Sophia, was born November 13, 2013. Hannah broke up with Jake in 2015. He never wanted it to end. When investigators finally got warrants to search the Wagner's property on Peterson Road and a farm they'd sold in neighboring Adams County, what they pulled out reads like a checklist for the murders themselves. Divers searching a pond on the property recovered a modified flashlight. Jake would later admit under oath it had been converted into a homemade gun silencer. Investigators found a Glock 17 case, ammunition, a drum magazine, a lockpick set, and a brass catcher, a device designed to catch shell casings as a gun fires, specifically so a shooter doesn't leave them behind at a scene. Hundreds of loose shell casings turned up on the property itself, some matching ammunition types found at 2 of the 4 crime scenes. They also found a bug detector, designed to sweep for hidden cameras, audio devices, and GPS trackers. A family checking to see if they were being watched. But the most damning piece of evidence wasn't a weapon at all. It was a piece of paper, and it would take a state forensic examiner months to prove it was fake. At the center of the entire motive was a custody dispute over Sophia. And prosecutors would eventually prove that members of the Wagner family didn't just want custody, they tried to manufacture paperwork to help them get it. A relative named Frederica Rita Newcomb was charged in connection with forging custody documents related to the case. She ultimately pleaded guilty to a lesser obstruction charge, but the underlying documents told investigators everything about how far this family was willing to go, long before anyone pulled a trigger. They weren't just planning a custody fight. They were building a paper trail to justify taking a child away from a family they were about to erase. Quick pause before we get into what happened when investigators finally sat one member of this family down and got him to talk. Where's everyone watching from tonight? Drop your city or country below. I always like seeing how far these stories travel. Okay. Back to the case. In spring 2017, about a year after the murders, while the public is still chasing cartel theories, the Wagners sell everything in Ohio and move to Alaska. They tell people they've gone up north for work, trucking, heavy equipment. Investigators want to talk to them before they leave. They don't move fast enough. By the time agents catch up, the Wagners are already thousands of miles away, in a state where nobody asks questions about a quiet family. It will be more than a year before anyone is formally charged. And when investigators finally build the case strong enough to make an arrest, what they uncover about the motive is almost too small and too devastating to believe. Here's what prosecutors eventually lay out once the case moves from theory to indictment. This was never about marijuana. It was never really about money. It was about Sophia, Jake and Hannah's daughter, and who got to raise her. Prosecutors said Angela Wagner had become fixated on the idea that her granddaughter should be raised as a Wagner, full stop, with no Rhoden involvement at all. The family wanted that child, and they were willing to kill to make it happen. The plan didn't start as a plan to kill 8 people. It started smaller, targeting Hannah alone. But somewhere in the planning, it grew. If Hannah died, the Wagners believed the Rhodens would eventually figure out who did it and come for them in return. So the solution became total: remove everyone who might come looking for answers. And when Jake Wagner finally took the stand against his own family, he didn't just confirm the motive. He described, second by second, what it felt like to carry it out. In October 2022, at his brother George's trial, Jake Wagner sat on the witness stand and testified that he and his father did the actual shooting, after the family had plotted and planned the killings for months. He testified he was the one who had to talk his mother and brother into going through with it. He described walking up to Hannah Rhoden, the mother of his daughter, the woman he'd dated since she was 13, and shooting her twice in the head. According to his own testimony, she looked up at him and made a sound before the second shot. Investigators would later find one detail that almost gave the whole plan away on its own: Jake missed a single shell casing. It was found under the crib where one of the surviving infants had been sleeping, feet from where a killing had just happened, in a room the Wagners had otherwise tried to leave spotless of evidence. There's one more detail about the timing of this attack that's almost impossible to sit with. Just days before the massacre, Hannah had given birth to a second daughter, with a different father, not Jake. Testimony at trial confirmed the Wagners knew about that birth, and deliberately waited until after it happened to carry out the killings. That newborn, along with 2 other small children, was found completely unharmed. Left alive in rooms where every adult around her had just been executed. Whoever planned this waited for a birth. And spared the children. Patience and precision, wrapped around a plan to erase an entire family. Which is exactly why it took investigators 2.5 more years to finally put handcuffs on anyone. More than 2.5 years after the first 911 call, agents finally move. George, Billy, Wagner III, Angela Wagner, George Wagner IV, and Jake Wagner are arrested and charged together with more than 80 criminal counts, 8 counts each of aggravated murder, each carrying the possibility of the death penalty. Ohio's Attorney General tells reporters the family had been meticulous, both in planning the killings and in the years-long effort to cover their tracks afterward. For a community that spent 2.5 years assuming a stranger did this and vanished, the news lands like a second shock: the killers never left. They were 2 counties over, running a business, showing up in town, the entire time. Exactly 5 years to the day after the murders, in April 2021, Jake Wagner stands in a Pike County courtroom and pleads guilty to all 8 counts of aggravated murder, plus more than a dozen additional charges. Under his plea deal, the death penalty comes off the table on one condition: he testifies against his own parents and brother, the family he helped plan the murders with in the first place. He's sentenced to life, with parole eligibility after 32 years. His mother, Angela, follows with her own guilty plea to conspiracy and evidence tampering. At a later hearing, when asked directly whether her plea deal was really about one day getting out of prison to see her grandchildren, she said yes. She also told the court she was more than sorry, and admitted, in her own words, that it wasn't enough. She was sentenced to 30 years. 2 down. 2 left. And the next chapter of this case is still being written, right now, in 2026. George Wagner IV chose a different path, not guilty, and a trial in 2022, the first time any member of the family faced a jury. Over roughly 8 weeks, jurors heard from firearms examiners who traced a cut-up 1911 Colt pistol back to shell casings at the crime scenes, footprint analysts who examined bloody prints at the first house, and forensic accountants who walked through the family's finances in the months before the murders. They saw the forged custody paperwork. They saw the recovered silencer. They heard the wiretaps. A jury convicted him on all counts. He was sentenced to life. But an appeals court has since thrown out that original sentence, and as of this year, his case remains unresolved, a full decade after the murders themselves. His father, George "Billy" Wagner III, the man prosecutors call the family's patriarch, still hadn't gone to trial as of this year's 10-year anniversary. The Wagners weren't strangers who slipped into Pike County and disappeared. They were neighbors. Family, by blood and by choice, people who'd sat at the same tables, celebrated the same birthdays, shared a daughter across 2 households. For 2.5 years, they let the surviving Rhodens believe their killer was still out there, unnamed, maybe a stranger, maybe tied to the drugs on the property. The Wagners searched alongside them. Grieved alongside them, publicly. All while knowing exactly where the truth was buried. This case didn't break because of one lucky clue. It broke because investigators refused to let the easier story, cartels, drug debts, a stranger in the night, replace the slower work of following the evidence back to the people who actually had a reason. What failed here, before any forensics, before any trial, was trust. And trust, once a family hands it to the wrong people, doesn't ring any alarms on its way out the door.